So my name is James Herbsleb. I guess my work in AI is mainly teaching a couple of classes. For one thing, ethics and policy issues in computing, and I'm developing a new class about manipulation and influence online that I'll be teaching in the fall. Also, as director of the Societal Computing Program, I sort of oversee a program where a lot of the people are involved in various forms of AI. So that also sort of involves me in the area. Yeah, I think my own research doesn't really involve AI, frankly. So my research is on things like collaboration in software development, collaborative environments and how people use them. So it doesn't really lean very much on AI, frankly. I'm very interested in how computing technology in general, which of course includes AI, impacts society and how we can use artificial intelligence to understand more about how society operates. I think right now we have a lot of systems based on AI and other kinds of technologies that are deployed by companies for particular purposes, serving particular business models, and often they provide fantastic services, like Google search and Facebook and so on. But what I think we don't pay enough attention to is the kind of emergent effects that you have from all of these things being deployed out in the world. So, for example, Facebook has their engagement algorithm, which is really, really effective at, finding things and showing you things that you want to see, and it will keep you engaged. YouTube has something similar to show you the next up, YouTube video. But we don't really know very much about what does that do to people's opinions? What does that do to how they see the world? What does it do to groups of people as they sort of split apart and only live in these kind of isolated information bubbles? And those are some of the issues that I think societal computing needs to deal with. We want to have a group of researchers that are looking at these things, trying to understand them, trying to figure out what these technologies are doing to us, and figure out what kinds of technology policy might be appropriate for regulating them, and trying to make sure that all these great technologies have the effects that we want and don't have a lot of unintended consequences. Ethics and policy issues in computing. And it's for undergraduates. It was sort of aimed at sophomores, but I find that I get undergraduates from freshmen to seniors, and they come from all over the university. And so we do a couple of things. One is we look a little bit at ethical theory. So we have a framework for thinking kind of systematically about things, about the kinds of effects we want to see. I think students just often come into this, whether they're technology students or humanities students, they often come into this area of talking and thinking about technology. They just have opinions. They think it should be this way, or they don't like this, or they do like that. And of course, you can't really get anywhere persuading other people just by saying you don't like something, or you just sort of end up butting heads or not really resolving anything. So I think that's where the importance of ethical theory is. That if you can agree on some way to approach what you think is good and what is right, then you can argue, you can relate new technologies and their impact to those things. For example, utilitarian theories look at consequences of actions, and there's several different theories. So we pay attention to theory, learn a little bit about that, and then we have what are effectively case studies of a number of different technologies where we look at things like one of the things we look at is technology that police departments are starting to use to deploy police resources, and the intent of that and the actual impact of it, because it usually trains on biased data and creates biased effects. We look at face recognition, we look at autonomous weapons. There's just a whole range of topics. So I hope the students come out of that able to sort of think not just as technologists about, gee, how can I build this, but also, what are the impacts of this, and think about the ethical issues that are involved. What's interesting to me is we're starting to see in places like Microsoft and Amazon and Google and elsewhere, engineers kind of rising up and just refusing to work on certain things. So I think that's all to the good. So it shows that somebody's doing a good job educating people and kind of making them think about the consequences of what we're doing. I don't think that's a substitute for appropriate regulation necessarily, but it's very encouraging to me. Oh, that class I started teaching maybe 10 or 12 years ago. My first class had 3 students, and now I usually have about 40, and now it satisfies the requirement for some majors, so I'm expecting that to go up from there. But it seems to be a lot of interest in this area, especially these days. People are becoming much more concerned. I think tech companies have fallen from grace a little bit in the last year or so, and there's a lot more interest in thinking about all the consequences of these technologies. It's going to look more specifically at how technologies are used to influence people's opinions, create dissension. Sometimes technologies themselves, because of things like engagement algorithms, may lead to opinions that become more extreme as you follow the recommended trail of videos on YouTube, for example. There's some evidence that leads you towards more extreme opinions. So here it's more, as opposed to the other courses, which is ethics and technologies, this is going to be much more behavioral science and how persuasion happens. There's a lot known among psychologists, for example, about how opinions change, how you can influence people's behavior, sales tactics, and all those kinds of things. So we're going to study the behavioral science of it, and then again, through kind of case studies, look at different technologies, look at how Facebook has been used to create dissension, for example, through a series of technologies, and kind of see how they work, so people are aware of when they see new stories on Facebook or are offered a new video on YouTube or see advertisements of a particular sort, they're aware of the impact that that can have on them. Well, I think we've been getting a very rosy picture for most of the technology companies. I think in response, though, to criticisms of both Google for their favoring their own services, for example, as the EU has hit them for, and Facebook finally admitting that their system has been used for manipulative purposes. I think they're really starting to try to come to terms with that. I mean, they're still profit-seeking enterprises, so that's going to be their main motivation, which is fine, but they're starting to see that they have some responsibilities beyond that. And I think they're taking a hard look at that. Twitter is trying to get rid of fake accounts. So you see a lot of activity now that I think is very good. I think, as the evidence of the Google and Facebook and Microsoft engineers were talking about who wouldn't do certain kinds of things because they thought it was unethical, I think most people care about these things. I don't see tech companies as big evil giants. I just see that as long as their motivation is primarily economic, which it naturally is, these kinds of concerns just aren't the focus of their attention. So governments and people have brought that to their attention, and I think they care too. And they're actually, I think, trying to solve some of these problems. I'm not sure we can leave it to businesses alone. But yeah, I think they're becoming much better about that. Yeah, I think so. As a educator, I think my responsibility is to try to just help my students understand the ethical dimensions of their engineering work. I'm really have worried for some time that we're sending off a lot of really super smart students, very technically capable students, to mainly 4 big tech companies. I understand that's where most of them end up, according to our surveys. And that's great, but I think if they're purely technically focused, these are people who are going to rise to positions of responsibility. A good proportion of them will. And unless they've had a good grounding in ethics and thinking about the consequences of their decisions beyond the welfare of the company, the welfare of society, I think we'll be much better off if they have that kind of background. So my responsibility as an educator is try to do the best I can to disseminate that kind of information, but engage them in that kind of thinking and get them to engage each other. I mean, one of the favorite things I see is when students come and tell me, Yeah, this thing we were talking about in class the other day, this engagement algorithm. We were talking about that in the dorm, and I could use all this stuff I learned in class to kind of persuade my fellow students. Yeah, I love to see that maybe it's really having an impact on how they think about things. I'm also trying to do other things outside the classroom. There's a magazine read by a lot of practicing software engineers. It's called IEEE Software, and I'm going to start doing a societal computing column in that regularly, where I hope to bring some attention to these kinds of things as well. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the big fear that you see people talking about a lot is that they'll just replace people in all sorts of different jobs, and all of a sudden there won't be any work anymore, except for people who build AI systems. Historically there's always been this concern. Every wave of industrialization and automation has produced this fear that machines will take over, the jobs will disappear, it's going to be a disaster. And who knows, it could happen. There's nothing that guarantees that new jobs that are created by technologies will, somehow be sufficient to replace the jobs that are cannibalized by technology. But so far, historically, the record has been pretty good, that, things sort of self-adjust, new opportunities come to light. I think the fear comes as much as anything from the jobs that are lost are very visible. You can really see that, and you can anticipate that. If all surgeons get replaced by robots, we'll be able to see these people lost their jobs. But the new opportunities are much harder to see. It's going to take a lot of imagination. It will take a lot of clever people thinking up new ways to make a living. So it's much harder to anticipate that. So it's very hard to balance out those two and see where we're going to end up. But my feeling is that we'll probably end up okay in the long run. In the short term, there could be a lot of displacement of people, and I think that we need to have government policies which support people in retraining, which takes care of them if their skills are just no longer relevant and they can't retrain for whatever reason. So I think we need to be much more have policies that provide much more help when these kinds of dislocations occur. But I think in the long run, we're probably going to be just fine. Yeah, 20 years from now, wow, I have no idea, really. I don't think that the main thing AI does will be to replace people. I think the main thing AI is going to do is going to make their jobs easier and different and better in most ways. So I think AI will have a huge effect on replacing a lot of the drudgery, a lot of the more repetitive things. Will have big impacts on, like robotics, for example, taking a lot of the more dangerous jobs that people now have to do. So I think it will assist with the things that AI and robots are really good at, and hopefully let people focus more on things that are, matters of judgment or matters of aesthetics, or things that people are, at least it seems now, uniquely able to do. So I think it's probably going to improve everybody's job. One of the big dangers is we're seeing more economic disparity now than we have for maybe a century, since the Gilded Age. And I think that technology often has a big role in making that worse. If you replace manual labor with robots, then the portion of the revenue that you earn from whatever this work happens to be, the portion that goes to labor, to people's wages, is smaller. The portion that goes to capital is, of course, larger, and that, of course, contributes to income and wealth disparity. So I think that's another major thing we're going to have to look at in the future. Of course, the federal tax policy is going exactly the wrong direction now, but hopefully to be able to incorporate AI and things like robots into more and more work situations, we're going to have to deal with the fact that it's going to make income disparity worse, and that's not going to be acceptable for society. But for human dignity, I think that people who remain employed will have perfectly good jobs and will not suffer from that. I think in the short run, some people will have a very difficult finding a job, and that's going to be very tough on them. And potentially erode some of the feeling of dignity. If it does, in fact, displace people long term, then we may need to think about what are the sources of human dignity. Do you have to work? Do you have to work full time, or are there other pursuits? So this idea that you have to work is a fairly modern invention anyway, right? At one time, it was having to work was seen as a little bit embarrassing. If you were anybody who was anybody, you would have inherited a ton of money in a royal position, and you wouldn't have to, sully yourself with actual work. So that's kind of our recent cultural invention. And if AI does manage to take on so much work that people are working a lot less, and a lot of people maybe don't work, I think we need to think about human dignity very differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems on some level that paradigm of some of the ethical structures is certainly something to rely upon, but that your students would be engaging with as well as they're starting to make some of these decisions if they become leaders in these arenas. Yeah,
I certainly hope they can take a role in addressing some of these things. It's certainly something we talk about a lot in class, and I think especially the students who choose to sign up for a class like this, you really have a lot of concerns and really want to make sure that we manage technology development and evolution in a way that serves human dignity and doesn't undermine it. I guess the main thing we've considered there are kind of decision-making and resource allocation kinds of systems. Like the one I mentioned a little earlier, the systems that are often used by police departments to decide how to allocate their resources, or other decision-making for things like credit applications. And a lot of what seems a little demeaning about these things is that you don't really know. It's very hard to understand what the basis for the decision is. So if you apply for a loan, let's say you want to buy a house, and you're turned down, it's very hard to know exactly why. And it's also, even if you kind of find out why, if they have some way of informing you about that, the things that it uses to decide not to give you credit may seem silly and irrelevant. And it could be, who knows what features they're using to base their models on, and features could incorporate some bias because they happen to be collinear with things that we would recognize as bias, like race or income level or gender. Or it could just be things that are strange for some reason. My shoe size might predict whether I'm going to repay my loan or not. I don't know. And it feels an affront to be dealt with on things that seem irrelevant. I would like to be dealt with on things that reflect my character, not shoe size or other irrelevant characteristics.
Mm. So pushing that a little bit further, what do you think the implications are for human relationships within that context?
Hard to say. I mean, more and more I think human relationships are being mediated by AI on social media platforms, on dating sites, which I presume are becoming more technologically sophisticated as well. So it's having a lot of impact, I think. I don't think we know exactly what that impact is yet, but I think it's, for example, extending people's social networks. Social media certainly seem to allow you to keep in touch, at least to some extent, with a much larger group of people. I think it also pulls people into the social sphere in ways that are not always helpful. So I see youngsters running around these days, they're always like this, they're always stumbling along the sidewalk, tripping over parking meters or whatever, and just sort of constantly in touch with, who knows, their audience. And this sense that they have to be in touch with somebody somewhere all the time, I think it's a little weird. It's changing kind of people's sense of their place in the world. Everybody's managing their own little audience. It's like we're all like mini celebrities and we have to be in touch with our audience all the time. I'm not sure that's terribly healthy. I think it's one of the ways that technology kind of preys on our frailties a little bit. It's like we all evolved in an environment where calories were scarce, for example. And so we have built-in preference for sugar and fat, and that's it's a very good thing when the environment is very lean. You have to look really hard to get enough calories to survive. If I can go down to the second floor here and buy 50 Snickers bars,
Yeah.
that preference is not necessarily a good thing in this environment that we've created with technology, right? And I think the way I tend to think about social media is they're doing kind of the same thing. We have a built-in desire for social contact, for approval, for some people to like something we say, etc. And when that's scarce, that's great. It kind of ties us together, binds us together, that I want you to approve of me and so on. But if you have this network of 1,000 people and you can get liked, every 2 minutes, you kind of obsess with that. And so I think, again, it's like the Snickers bars. It's a little bit addictive. It's not necessarily healthy, and I think we need to figure out ways of letting people better moderate their behavior. I think we have some unfortunate examples around right now. I think that the form in which you take in information really changes the extent to which you're able to or bother to vet it, to see how much you should trust it, how what you can really rely on. So I think another impact of social media is that certain people have been able to use this as a platform to just say things to people who are really ready to accept certain things because of their biases, their predispositions. You can appeal to their prejudices and throw the red meat out, as they say, right? Which they consume very uncritically. It's the technology that allows this direct delivery from some individual in a very short form to millions of people and bypasses all editorial function is a very different way of disseminating information, and has given certain groups lots of power to sway opinion over their sort of loyal audience. And so I think that's rather dangerous. I think the editorial role that was played by great newspapers is extremely important. The tracking down of sources, the correcting of errors. And if you throw all that out, and if the primary information dissemination mechanism for society is short-form tweets with no vetting of anything, and people just believe what makes them feel good, I think that's a dangerous place to be. And I think we've kind of arrived there. So I think this technology that empowers certain groups of people, certain individuals, is in place.
It's in place in dubious forms.
It's in place in dubious forms, not always dubious. The ones that get the most attention because they're terrifying are pretty dubious. But, it lets bands keep in touch with their fans. It lets people keep in touch with their families. I mean, there's a very good side to it, too. But it's the scary ones that I seem to gravitate to just because they're worrisome. Yeah, and I think we're seeing in social media some emphasis now on trying to do a better job of at least eliminating fake accounts with deliberately fabricated news and amplification with bots and all this kind of stuff. They're trying to take some action, but the way the technology works, though, is just fundamentally different with this distribution from one to many with nothing but an algorithm deciding who sees it. There's not a lot of human judgment involved in that. And so we've sort of eliminated the human hands-on, which contains some of this. But these are the kinds of things that I hope our students will see and will worry about. If they go to work at a social media company and rise to some position where they have some influence over the product, that they'll be aware that these are hugely important issues, and we'll be seeking solutions not just to make more revenue for the company, but to think about what the impact is going to be on all of us.
Yeah, and perhaps think a little bit more about the human decision making that goes into actually developing the algorithm to begin with.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the subtlety is sometimes just in the foundational practice of actually building these systems, right? On some level where
absolutely.
Technologists are developing the systems that might be kind of precluding, right, or beginning to edge out continued decision making by humans who are using the tool. But ultimately, it's a cache of humans that devised it to begin with.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it is the purely business motivation of a social media company which wants to maximize engagement. I mean, that's what they're tuning their algorithms to. They're algorithms that decide what to show you in Facebook, for example. They're very, very good at predicting engagement and selecting news stories on that basis. But suppose they were also motivated by ensuring that people see some sort of diversity of opinion. Could they become very, very good at finding stories that you may not agree with initially, but you would read? Well, maybe they could predict that really, really well. So you wouldn't just discard it, but it would be thought-provoking to you. I'd love to see them think more broadly about what would we be optimizing for here or maximizing if we were trying to use our technology to make society better in some way, make people smarter, make people more thoughtful, more informed. How would you be tuning the algorithm then? So my hope is that we'll kind of move in this direction. Companies like Facebook are showing some willingness to sacrifice some profits for creating a product that actually does, better things for society. So that could be another direction. The companies themselves could do an awful lot, I think, to minimize the damage and make this a really positive tool for keeping people broadly informed.
Yeah. So perhaps we're still in our adolescence.
I think so. I think so. Yeah. Well, I think there are lots of situations where robots to be effective, have to act on their own. Everything from planetary exploration to making decisions in rescue situations where it's impossible for someone else to be sort of controlling their moment-to-moment actions. So I think that's one good reason for autonomy, is that humans just aren't in a position under those conditions to provide a lot of direct control over the machine. And I think there's other places. I think we'll eventually get there in autonomous vehicles where they're just so much better at driving than people that it would be considered an unreasonable risk to put a person behind the wheel of a car, because your reflexes are so much slower and your ability to see hazards may be so much worse. I don't think we're going to get there. I don't think we'll be there for a while. But I think that in lots of cases that kind of thing will happen, where robots like the little ones Amazon has running around their warehouse floors will be much safer, will not be running into people or having people dump product over on themselves and so on. So I think there are a lot of situations where robots can do things better than we can, and AI systems in the same way will be able to maybe make medical diagnoses better than people. They're getting close to that now, I think. So I think there'll be a lot of ways where it's just an improvement over human judgment. And in those cases, it's just definitely a good thing. You hear a lot about general intelligence and human or machines and robots trying to acquire some sort of general intelligence. I think that's kind of unlikely, and I'm not sure it's that important or a good idea. It would be interesting, really interesting, I think, from a research point of view, if you could create something which could converse on many topics over a long period of time with a human and not be recognizable as an AI. That would be interesting. The chatbots that we have now are not so good at that, and they can be maliciously biased, as we've seen with Microsoft's unfortunate experience. But I'm not sure that's as important as more specialized kinds of intelligence. People are already generally pretty intelligent, and a lot of that intelligence is based on experience carried in the form of genes and DNA from millions of years, really, of evolution, from the days of early primates to now. You can think of all that as kind of a sort of a built-in experience that has provided some preferences, like a preference for sweet things, but it's also built-in learning mechanisms and biases that helps us figure out what to learn in a situation. And I think that kind of thing is really hard to duplicate, and I think that kind of underlies a lot of general intelligence. So I don't know, I think that's really interesting for a research point of view, super, super challenging, but I think in terms of what's going to have an impact, I think much more specialized systems, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to be much more important. One of the big ones, of course, that lots of people talk about is autonomous weapons, which is a very scary prospect. You know, it's actually possible, there's been some writing about this, that autonomous weapons in some ways may be more ethical than humans under some conditions. So, for example, they don't have fear, right? They don't injure people because they're afraid, or they don't get angry, or they don't seek revenge. Presumably you wouldn't program those things into them. So there may be conditions under which they're more ethical than humans wielding the same kinds of weapons. But on the other hand, it's, you know, using lethal force is a very weighty and difficult kind of judgment. And I'm not sure I trust any autonomous, you know, any algorithm in the decision to do that. I think there's some places they can be used maybe more defensively. Like, I understand that ships have defenses that will you know, hit incoming missiles and such, and there it's just a matter of no human can react fast enough or accurately enough. I think they're just used often in kind of autonomous mode, and kind of has to be, but they're shooting at something that's not alive anyway. More worrisome are things like, supposedly along in the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, there are weapons that are capable of being autonomous, or they're close to being autonomous, where they can apparently identify human targets, and they're not used autonomously now, but they could be. There are systems that turn not so good marksmen into expert marksmen, and they can also have facial recognition incorporated, which is kind of scary. So I think we would want to hold autonomous weapons to such a high standard of both ethics and accuracy, and that for me, it's just in the foreseeable future, I can't imagine actually wanting to do that, except under a few very limited conditions when it's defensive or things like that. So this comes up with autonomous vehicles all the time, right? Your autonomous vehicle crashes into somebody, and who knows why, there's some glitch in the algorithm, or the conditions were such that it didn't recognize this white semi-trailer in front of it, so on. And you see people talking about holding the car company responsible, or the driver's responsible no matter what, or the software developers are responsible, or all sorts of things. I think it's so hard to allocate blame that a better system would be something like a no-blame policy. So if you're driving an autonomous vehicle, you just pay insurance, and maybe manufacturers have to also contribute to insurance, and if people are damaged, you just pay for their expenses and you compensate them. That way everybody has to pay into this pool, and you don't have to worry in detail, in the occasion of this accident, who's really responsible. Was it this line of code? Was it, or was it, you know, improperly trained, or was it the vehicle company that didn't I don't know, give the right context for the AI? So I think we can just avoid a lot of these issues of who's responsible by just realizing that there's going to be a certain number of accidents. We need to create a pool of resources to handle them, and deal with it that way.
It seems to work in an interesting way in terms of consumers, or choosing to work with or use devices like a car. Do you think that kind of system could translate to multinational agreements in regards to the use of autonomous weaponry?
Yeah, I think that the situations are very different in terms of potential amount of harm and you know, the intention of the system. I mean, you can imagine autonomous weapons being hacked and having, you know, lethal robots just running around and terrorist attack. Or, you know, I don't know how you would create a pool of resources. You wouldn't know how large of a pool you need. You wouldn't, you don't want to provide resources if there are actually bad actors involved. You know, when automobile companies are making cars, they don't want accidents. They're actively trying to avoid that. But with autonomous weapons, causing harm is the whole point. And so I think you wouldn't want to create some system that would ensure against this damage when the whole point is to create damage. It would sort of free them up to not worry about that, right? I think that the very different kinds of situations.
What happens when, the consumer system, like the driverless cars, is hacked?
Yeah, I think that's a huge issue with things like autonomous vehicles, other autonomous technologies that move around in the world, or other things like Internet of Things, where there's sensors and actuators everywhere. That's a whole new world, and security becomes so important. And I don't think we've kind of got far enough yet. I mean, it was a couple of years ago that someone figured out how to hack a Jeep. And I think if a Jeep can be hacked, anything can probably be hacked. And so I just hope that new systems in Internet of Things kinds of contexts and other kinds of robotics contexts where these things will be deployed broadly will be designed from the ground up to be very secure, unlike the Internet, which security was thought about much later. So there are other colleagues here who are working on security and IoT kinds of systems, and I think they have some really good ideas for doing this, but it has to kind of be designed that way from the ground up. The one thing that's kind of interesting you see talked about, but is kind of a ways off, are issues of when, if ever, would AI technologies demand civil rights, and should they? If we ever develop systems that are indistinguishable from humans, which we're a long way from that, but it's not inconceivable that we could be sitting here having this conversation and you might be a robot. I might not know. But then would you be entitled to some sort of civil rights, having all the capabilities of a human? Those are kind of very interesting questions that science fiction writers like to think about. But I think one day we'll have to confront that sort of thing.
Well, we have, the beginnings of that. If nothing else, we have governments like Saudi Arabia that have captured that imagination in offering citizenship to a robot. So even with, we touched briefly on general intelligence,
right,
and the ways in which we are far away from that.
Right.
There seem to be gestures towards this imagined future. Whether it's fantasy or not, we have very strange instantiations of that presently. Yeah,
and I think we will get to the point where it becomes a serious issue. I mean, if you look at, there have been studies actually of kids dealing with, and even adults dealing with even just stuffed toys, or more so animated toys. And if they're left to play with them and pet them or whatever for a little while, and someone asks them to take a hammer and smash them, they won't do it. And this is just a stuffed toy, right? So I think they're going to be very powerful feelings that people have towards autonomous systems that they've interacted with, especially if they resemble living things in some way. That will be an issue for the future, I think.
Yeah, and as we're living longer, increasingly a health concern comes in loneliness.
Yes.
Right? So the sophistication of the chatbots, as long as it's not berating you, what kind of companionship, unless you're into that, what kind of companionship is it offering that is more difficult to continue to provide within our society?
Right. If it gets better at it, then your grandchildren, will they be jealous?
Right.
So, yeah, future issues, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. This is interesting.